Good morning. Welcome to the Distinguished Lecture Series of the Jefferson Science Fellowship Program. Let me I can't turn my camera on, but our lecturer today is Surajit Sen, and you'll be hearing more about him in just a moment. My name is Leah Probst, and I'm with the staff of the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. I have a few housekeeping rules to start out with. Before we get started, first has to do with questions. We will be taking questions through the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen at the end of the session. So simply type your question in the box at any time and click send. And for the recording of the session, this webinar is being recorded. Please understand that any questions you submit may be read aloud and included in our recording. And by this time next week, the recording should be posted to the National Academy's Vimeo page, and a link will be posted on the Jefferson Science Fellowship webpage. And finally, for technical support, if you have any technical issues during the event, please contact Zoom technical support at 1-888-799-9666 and choose option 2. We'll also send that out in the chat. We won't be sending that in the chat box, but with that, I'm turning things over to Amanda Natero with USAID.
Hi, good morning, and welcome to the third and unfortunately final USAID lecture of the 2021 Jefferson Science Fellowship Distinguished Lecture Series. On behalf of USAID and the Bureau for Development, Democracy, and Innovation's Fellowship team, it is our pleasure to welcome you to this virtual lecture, and we appreciate your participation and interest in this presentation. The Jefferson Science Fellowship Program is administered by the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. Jefferson Science Fellows are tenured academic scientists, engineers, and physicians at US colleges and universities. They bring a broad range of scientific and technical expertise to the work of USAID and the Department of State, and learn firsthand about international development and foreign policy processes. Starting in 2003, the Jefferson Science Fellowship Program averages 15 fellows per year at USAID and the Department of State. To date, USAID has hosted over 30 Jefferson Science Fellows. And with that, I'd like to turn this over to Danielle Pearl of USAID to provide an introduction to Dr. Surajit Sen.
Thank you, Amanda. And good morning, everyone, for joining us. My name is Danielle Pearl, and I am the Evidence and Learning Lead in the Local Faith and Transformative Partnerships Hub in the Bureau for Development, Democracy, and Innovation at USAID. On behalf of my office, it has been our great pleasure this year to host Dr. Surajit Sen as a 2020 Jefferson Science Fellow and Senior Science Advisor with USAID. Surajit Sen is a professor at the State University of New York at Buffalo, where he has been since 1993. He has a BSc with honors from the Presidency College in Calcutta, India, and a PhD from the University of Georgia. Surajit is a theoretical physicist who works on non-equilibrium statistical physics and nonlinear dynamics. His work has focused on impulse propagation in granular materials such as soil and powders and its applications, such as in detecting abandoned buried landmines. He has been active in research on how excited nonlinear many-body systems relax at late times and introduced the concept of quasi-equilibrium in 2004. He has most recently been active in designing systems which can block all forms of sound waves. And very relevant to today's talk, Surajit and his students have been studying social behavior of living systems since the early 2000s. Surajit is a fellow of the American Physical Society, a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and a Fulbright Academic and Professional Excellence Fellow in India. He has been at USAID for a year since August 2020 as a Senior Science Advisor to the locally led development initiatives in the LIFT Hub. His time with USAID has been possible due to the Jefferson Science Fellowship through the National Academies. Surajit has been interested in studying the problem of educating rural youth for many years, which has also been a major focus of his time as a JSF at USAID. His talk will focus on the inherently complex problem of educating rural youth and the importance of locally led approaches in this journey. Now, before I hand things off, I'll just say that this is our office's second year participating in the Jefferson Science Fellows Program, and we're very grateful for Surrogate's wide-ranging contributions to our work in advancing our thinking on locally led development. You'll hear more about these in a moment, and with that, I'm very honored and very pleased to present Dr. Surrogate Sen.
Thank you so much, Danielle. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. The title of my talk is Can We Empower the 3 Billion Youth of the Developing World? Importance of locally led initiatives and acknowledging hidden unpredictable parameters. Before I start, it's worth thinking about Dan Siegel's observations about youth. Where attention goes, neural firing flows and neural connection grows. Dan Siegel is a very well-known pediatric psychiatrist. He's an adjunct faculty at UCLA. He runs the Mindsight Institute in Santa Monica, California, and he is a New York Times bestselling author of quite a few wonderful books. Next slide, please. I would like to point out that the views expressed today are entirely mine, and in no way they reflect the position or positions of USAID. Next slide, please. To understand the lives of the rural youth, we must remember that context matters. So we'll look at one country, and the country we'll look at is India. And why should we look at India? One reason why we'll look at India is because India is a country with enormous diversity. There are 325 languages. Depending upon how you count them, the number could be higher. This is a culturally and geographically diverse nation, also a land which is ancient with lots of history. All of these things play a role in what we're going to talk about today. India is 66% rural, which makes it unique. No large country has such a large rural population. I've listed a few countries here, Egypt, the Kyrgyz Republic, Afghanistan, Bangladesh, but they're all much smaller countries. Furthermore, just to give you a context, US is about 83% urban. So in a great many ways, US and India are very different when it comes to this aspect of looking at society, okay? One of the interesting things about India is that there are about 600 million young people in India. How I define young people is a little bit more relaxed than the various definitions around. So pretty much the population under 25 and not too young is what I mean by young people. So that's about 600 some million total in India. This is about 1/5 of the world's population, just to give you a context. So it's an enormous number of young kids. India is a young country also. In the inset here, I show actually some abandoned youth. These are young girls in a facility for juvenile delinquents. This is in Calcutta. My colleagues and I were talking to them and asking them what's on their minds. There was a question about climate change from a 12-year-old girl. I'll show more about this girl, hopefully down the road. Next slide, please. Let me start by saying here that India's way is not Europe's. India is not Calcutta and Bombay. India lives in her 700,000 villages. This is a direct quote from Mahatma Gandhi. I'll talk about villages and rural life and rural youth in India. I'll talk about ways to empower these youth. I'll talk about why it is so important to do experiments and learn how to give this youth a chance. I'll focus on the state of West Bengal today, part of the former state of Bengal in undivided pre-partition India. A part of this Bengal is now Bangladesh, a different country. West Bengal has Himalayas in the north and the Bay of Bengal in the south. The Gangetic Delta is the world's largest delta here as you approach the Bay of Bengal. This is also one of the most fertile lands of the world. All these things play a role in what we're going to talk about today. The population of this region is around about 20 million or so in the northern 24 Parganas area, which is what I'm going to focus on, which is in the small circle in the white map of West Bengal that you see. Actually, it's region 14 is not 24 Parganas. I won't restrict myself only to not 24 Parganas, but this is the area I'm looking at. Next slide, please. We can move on to the next slide. This is just to show you it's a pretty area. So let's go to the next slide. No, sorry. Yeah, next slide. Yeah, this is the one. Let me talk about rural society in this North 24 Parganas area. The people here can be roughly divided into 4 groups. The wealthy business class with an income of about $3,000 or so per month. They can afford all the creature comforts one might desire. This is about 10% of the population. Then comes the upper middle class, about 35% of the population. Here we have the government sector and the private sector employees and the landowners. Then comes the lower middle class, about 30% or so of the population. Incomes are much lower. They can afford some of the creature comforts like TV and cell phones, not smartphones. Many are farmers who don't own land. Unemployed and underemployed people are also in this group. And then, of course, about 25% of this population is what I can call quite poor. And they earn about 10 to 14,000 rupees a month. Just to give you a context, $1 is about 73 Indian rupees. This is slightly above the extreme poverty mark, which is about $2 a day. This is about $3 to $4 a day. However, $3 to $4 a day in the region is not that small. Okay, so these people can typically afford some things, like they can also afford cell phones. Maybe some of them afford internet. They own motorbikes, if not a car. They're fairly comfortably there, although their incomes may not be, fully guaranteed all the time. There may be daily laborers and so on. Just to give you a sense of how the different populations are, there are at least 3 universes here at play. People in the affluent and upper middle class live in one form of rural India, whereas the poor live in another, while the middle class may be living in another. Next slide, please. Bengal is a land of contrasts. Okay, so to briefly give you an idea, Bengal has had rich personalities, great cultural and intellectual accomplishments. There has been 6 Nobelists out of Bengal. Of them, 4 are Bengali Nobelists. I should also mention in this vein that Muhammad Yunus, who won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2006 from Bangladesh, is basically from Bengal itself, not from West Bengal, but from Bangladesh. And as I said, both comprise the undivided former Bengal pre-partition. He's famous for his work on founding the Grameen Bank and his work on microfinance and credit. Here you can see a picture of him speaking at USAID. Next slide, please. This is an important slide. The education system is not in good shape in the region, which is not uncommon in much of rural India. But the context again matters. There is a large student-to-teacher ratio in government schools. Only a small number of students perform at the grade level because up until 8th grade, there is limited assessment. So accountability is not really there for the students up until they reach 8th grade. This is not necessarily good for them. The wealthy send their children to private schools. They have multiple tutors to help them. So this is the rich India that they live in, or the rich rural India that they live in. Learning is strictly controlled by government boards. There is very little room for innovation and creativity here. There is strong emphasis on rote learning. The textbooks are also quite uninspiring. Very few lower middle class and poor children would enter college, sadly. Worse, a college degree does not really improve job prospects much. Large mental health problem for youth across India still persists. In Bengal itself, just to give you some numbers, there are about 15,000 suicides per year. Many of them are youth. About 17% of world suicides have been coming from India. However, that said, there are rural youth who are exceptions. The president of the State University of New York at Buffalo, which is my home base, is one of them, as is my mentor and friend, Professor K.R. Srinivasan of New York University, a leading fluid dynamicist and a member of the National Academy of Sciences and the National Academy of Engineering. The better data is clearly needed here, and this is hard to come by. We really need to understand and drill down into what the society is like, what the students are going through, and what's happening to them. As regards data, I would like to thank my friend Farooq Brahma, People's Dialogue from Accra, Ghana, for educating me on this issue. Next slide, please. It may sound uncomfortable for many, many of us, but education seems to have been by the elite and for the elite for more than 4,500 years. Going back to somewhere around 2600 BCE in Egypt, you can find pretty detailed write-ups on how education was like. This education system is hence not a natural fit for the larger educational needs of the world's rural communities. Historically, for the youth, the focus has been on skill set development. Historically, I mean pretty old history. Further, there has always been pathways for the gifted in rural areas and elsewhere to pursue formal education. By the way, when I talk about rural education, I am leaving out the slum children. That is another universe. But many of the things that I'll be talking about, I believe, may be relevant to that body as well. Next slide, please. There has been a strong effort made by the education community to explore the benefits of introducing computers to every child. The key idea is that computers plus rich online resources plus teachers can somehow lead to educational gains. Seymour Papert, I may be mispronouncing, was an influential early thinker in this domain and supported that computers could make learning possible for all. It's a very important thought and we shouldn't ignore it. Great efforts have been made by Sugata Mitra. He's famous for Delhi's so-called hole-in-the-wall experiment, where a computer screen was embedded in a wall for street children to access, and they learn quite a few things, and there are detailed accounts of this. A sophisticated effort was led by Swami Manohar and his colleagues at the Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore, and they're famous for making the Simputer, which is this tiny handheld device that you see on the bottom right of the screen. So this handheld device is basically like a Palm Pilot, and this is an indigenous device, but this device is at the end of the day not cheap. Just to give you a sense of numbers, most of these devices at the cheapest cost about $100 a piece. For 600 million kids, you're talking $60 billion just to get a computer to the kids. That's not really practical. I may be overestimating numbers a little bit, but that's a ballpark. There are also other issues. There is an internet bandwidth problem. There is a lack of smartphones, as I said. Cell phones necessarily are not smartphones. There's a cost of teacher training. Also, what about the environmental stewardship question for the rural areas in these poor countries? Next slide, please. It is worth mentioning another big effort. This was led from a group from MIT, the One Laptop Per Child project. This is a well-known project, and this attracted a significant amount of funding from a variety of donors. The idea was to make $100 computers available to every child around the world. The effort had some limited successes in some areas. However, the vision has turned out to be not quite realizable. If one is being honest. Among the problems, the laptops currently cost about $250. And this is clearly unaffordable to most developing countries when it comes to investing in their children. There has been maintenance and servicing issues. Using the open source Linux platform has posed some challenges. There has been security issues as well. There are so many other aspects of education, such as trained teachers, infrastructure, internet access, as I said, and bandwidth, ability for the children to study at home, peer support. All of these are important issues. For example, the local electricity supply companies must be able to give electricity at home for the children to study. Again, computers are needed, they're important, but they can only do so much. And they also come with their own problems. More recently, a fairly strong effort is being led by a group from Toronto. They started this company called DataWind around 2000. Currently, it exists as Geotex, and it is still working to get computers to kids in rural India at an affordable price. Slide 12. So next slide, please. Here is another problem which actually cannot be solved by computers. Just as I said, some problems cannot be solved by computers. To be specific, let us look at the fact that some 2.8 million adolescent girls miss school per month when they have their periods in the state of Uttar Pradesh. With government support, many schools introduced indigenously made sanitary pad vending machines with incinerators. But the incinerators drove up the electricity costs in the schools, making them essentially unaffordable because the electricity has a budget, right? So if it costs too much to burn these sanitary pads, that really costs money. The problem basically could not be solved, as far as I know. In Gujarat, on the other hand, simple terracotta urns do the job of incineration, and it appears to work well. So local solutions have turned out to be really important in addressing this problem. And you certainly don't want 2.8 million girls in your state to miss school every month. There is a big problem also with disabled youth. The available toilet facilities are inadequate for them. There is a huge dropout rate for these youth. In essence, we lose our disabled kids. Next slide, please. So let's now turn to what kind of solutions might work. And I'm going to turn to locally led initiatives. The bridge from childhood to adulthood is a difficult one to cross, as I show on the left side in this slide. And USAID has introduced this notion of positive youth development, which is a framework to empower the youth and help them in this journey. In this particular version of PYD, Positive Youth Development, there are 6 C's in the framework. There is connection, which is the social connection, the issue of confidence, character, kids need to be caring, contribution, they need to take pride in their contribution, and competence. Youth is also where there is curiosity and innovation, right? So all of these intrinsic talents of youth seem really important and relevant for them to be able to cross the bridge from childhood to adulthood. Next slide, please. This is really a bottom-up process. An experiment along the lines of positive youth development was conducted by Swanirvar, which is an NGO based in North 24 Parganas of West Bengal that I have worked closely with for a great many years now. So let's get back to the experiments of Swanirvar on this matter. And let's look at some numbers for specificity, just to understand what the problem is and what kind of solutions are being experimented with. Again, experiment is emphasized. Some 2 million second graders eventually become 1/3 of a million high school grads. Yes, that is the attrition we are talking about. Only 1/5 million of them could potentially go to college because colleges have a capacity. And even if they go to college, that does not assure them a good job. So to give the kids a chance to dream of a good life, the idea was to give these youth, some kind of training, some kind of way to get ahead. And Swanirvar found a way which is actually similar to positive youth development to empower the rural youth. Dr. Sujit Sinha, who started Swanirvar, back in 1990, late 80s and early 90s, Nilang Shugain, who probably is in the audience from Swanirvar and others, played a critical role in training what they called the Kishore Kishori Bahini, essentially a youth force. This KKB work, the Kishore Kishori Bahini work, was funded by the Association for India's Development in the Bay Area. Next slide. Just to change gears, how important youth are to us. We as a society would not be here without the innovations of the youth. This was emphasized first to me by Dan Siegel himself and by Jim Helfand, who is a well-known astrophysicist at Columbia University. Just to look at history a little bit, Blaise Pascal, you've probably heard of Pascal's name. The first calculator, the addition subtraction machine, was constructed by Blaise Pascal. He was 19 years old. It was around 1642. Louis Braille, method to represent 64 letters and characters when he was 16 years old. This was round about 1825. Philo Farnsworth, components of the present all-electronic television, age 15, round about 1920s. Peter Chilvers, the first sailboard, what else? Age 12, around 1958. In more recent times, Ria Karumanchi, she introduced the smart cane, which is basically a cane, but that can sense wet regions and so on and so forth, and send sound waves to warn the person who is using the cane, age 14. Neil Deshmukh, device for face recognition and a locking-unlocking mechanism, age 14. Shubham Banerjee, first open source portable braille printer, age 12. Xochitl Guadalupe Cruz Lopez, solar-powered water heater using recycled objects, plastic water bottles, and so on, age 8. Gitanjali Rao, Tethys, which is a carbon nanotube-based sensor to detect lead in water. Kindly, an artificial intelligence-based cyberbullying detection system, and more, age 14 onwards. Fiona Ferreira, this is a crazy one. Use of ferrofluids in water bodies to attract microplastics and then use magnetic forces to remove the microplastics. Age 15. Erin Smith, an artificial intelligence tool that analyzes video footage for signs of Parkinson's disease, age 16. If that isn't mind-blowing, I don't know what is. So youth are really important. Next slide, please. The Kishore Kishori Bahini ran between 2004 and 2016. The effort was funded by the Association for India's Development, as I said, in the Bay Area. 117,046 youth participated from 80 villages in the North 24 Parganas area. All communities were represented, including youth from the underserved Dalit communities in the area. Here you see a picture of map making by the school students. This was a skill that they learned. And I'm told that this skill set became very handy for some of the villages when they actually wanted maps of the local region for developing various utility structures and so on and so forth. This story came directly from my friend and colleague, Nilang Shugain, from the region. Next slide, please. So let's drill down to the details of what the Kishore Kishori Bahini has been up to. The training has focused on issues of importance to the region. Context matters, as I said. They have been educated and trained to deal with health issues, especially, for example, diarrhea, which is a very common problem for young kids. Leads to dehydration and pretty serious illnesses. Sanitation and hygiene, very important stuff. Giving first aid, also very important stuff. Sex education, how to disinfect tube wells, which are needed for collecting everyday water. How to make kitchen gardens and grow their own foods, organically, of course. training them to produce medicinal herbs, teaching them to graft fruit trees, conduct environmental surveys, map making, poultry immunization, vaccinating livestock against common diseases, etc. The list goes on. I've just captured a few of the total that I've listed here from their annual report. You can see yoga, songs, folk dances, theater, and puppetry. I should say a word or two about puppetry. This puppetry has played a very important role in educating the rural kids. These puppet shows attract huge crowds in the villages. Thousands of people come. They have played a role in dealing with superstition issues, for example. They have played a role in giving these kids a life, letting them have some fun. And also it's a skill. So they do a great deal of work on puppetry. In fact, in recent times, they used puppetry to teach about COVID. I have that video, and if anyone is interested, I'll be happy to share it with you. Next slide, please. These pictures tell a great deal. On the left side, you have plant propagation and community gardens. Look at the kids. This is the work they're doing. They're learning about plants. They're learning about how to propagate them. They're making their community gardens. They're making their own kitchen. All potential on kitchen, stuff, whatever they want to eat. All these are potential ways of making a living. They don't have to take an exam, like a higher secondary exam or Bachelor of Science exam or whatever. Of course, if they want to do that, they can. Nobody's stopping them. The pathways exist. But this is something that gives them a real shot at a future. Look at citizen science in progress. They're measuring local rainfall and temperature on a regular basis in their areas. By the way, these areas have been affected by climate change. There has been quite a few major floods and cyclones that have essentially demolished many of these areas, and they have had to rebuild. They have had to recreate their lives from scratch. So knowing about this kind of science, how to deal with them, knowing about this, getting to have the skill sets they do really matters for them. There is an amazing NGO in Calcutta called Development Research Communication and Services Center, DRCSC. The people here, they work closely with those in Swanirvar, and they have been at the forefront of educating these kids in collaboration with Swanirvar. They have learned about the local trees, local insects, birds, about water, herbs, vegetables, rice, fish. This is the fish eating region of the world. Taking care of garbage, about the local economy, the importance of social work. Students learn to collect data from various sources, perform structured surveys, as I said, carry out their own observations and experiments, and analyze their data to make presentations. These are skill sets that many graduate students are getting in grad school and undergrads are getting in college. Next slide, please. Students, therefore, became the agents for collecting valuable data in the communities. Students got engaged with running local libraries, maintaining the village infrastructure, carrying out awareness campaigns, such as on arsenic in drinking water. This is a common issue in the Gangetic Delta region. It's not a man-made issue, it's a natural issue for the most part. Here you see a photo of the kids vaccinating poultry. I don't know if you can see that well, but these kids are actually vaccinating chicken. And they actually get a little bit of money by vaccinating these. So that's also a wonderful incentive for them to do what they're doing. Next slide, please. The methods that KKB, the Kishore Kishori Bahini project, has used are now being generalized and broadened. So the same ideas are now being implemented by Swanirvar in the state facilities for the juvenile delinquents. These kids come from a variety of backgrounds. Here you see fairly young kids on the top left, you see mostly adolescents, young men, teenagers on the top right. On the top right, what they're doing is actually making a garden. They're learning about gardening. This is a skill set that could help them earn a living. On the bottom left, they have their vegetable garden growing. All this is within the prison compound. On the bottom right, you can see me with the girl from that class that I showed you in one of the first slides. This is the girl that asked me about climate change, and we had a discussion about climate change when I was there. I didn't ask them to ask about climate change. It was their question. It was her question. These are some of the smartest kids I have met in a long, long time, just to give you an idea. We shouldn't be wasting their lives. On the top left, you see kids typically under 8 or 9. I don't exactly know their age range, but they're quite young. And they are doing a puppet show of sorts. This puppet show of sorts is being done pretty much as an impromptu show, just because I was visiting the place. And it was so much fun. Why are these kids here? That's another story. These kids are here because there's no one to take care of them for the most part, not for the boys, but for the girls and for the younger kids, boys and girls. That's the case. The parents are not there. They may be abandoned. Many of them end up in the brothels. The brothels are raided, and the cops bring them to these facilities. They're being taken care of by there. And people there that I met were wonderful. Next slide, please. One of the issues that we shouldn't forget is the really important aspect of educating the young girls. Because the young girls eventually become adult women. They go on to have kids. Once they become mothers, they play a huge role in educating their own children. They help make stable families. They play a role in reducing social problems, in mitigating problems such as alcoholism, etc., in the family. So it's really important to deal with the young girls, and one cannot forget about how important that is. Next slide, please. Here is some data that I got from the Swanirvar reports regarding what happened in terms of impact of the Kishore Kishori Bahini program. If you look at the graph, the bars in red are for the parents and the bars in blue are for the children. And these are the children who attended the Kishore Kishori Bahini program. As you can see, in terms of service in the unorganized sector, service in the government sector, and small businesses, those who went through the KKB program, they actually did quite a bit better than their parents. On the other hand, when it came to the farmer group, that was not quite the case. There were less of them became farmers. That's not the best, especially when you're talking about a region of the world which has the world's most fertile lands, right? So it's important to kind of see that this is a real challenge that one needs to worry about. The sample size isn't huge. 250 youth from 7 villages participated in random order in this study. Next slide, please. Here is a very rough measure of how effective the program was as perceived by these KKB graduates. Quite a few of them thought that the program was very effective when it came to first aid and rescue skills, when it came to anti-superstition skills, when it came to awareness about global warming and climate change, when it came to sex education and family planning, when it came to leadership and entrepreneurship, even there. and certainly in organic farming and waste management issues. The effect may be a little less dramatic when it comes to leadership and entrepreneurship, but let's be real. They don't learn leadership and entrepreneurship at all, right? Otherwise. So the fact that it's a difficult one, the fact that it's a challenge is not entirely a surprise. Perhaps the innovators in our communities can help show the way there. The communities, as you can see, played an enormous role in educating their own children, along with the highly skilled and talented, members of Swaneriver and other participating NGOs and communities. Next slide, please. To summarize then, let's not forget that primary education remains incredibly important. Everyone must learn to read, write, and do basic math. We cannot throw this away. So primary schools played their role, they continue to play their role. But beyond secondary school, which means beyond, let's say, 8th, 9th, 10th grade, or perhaps beyond 12th grade, many students may benefit from the kinds of vocational training we have touched upon here. There is a serious need to make the youth into caring citizens, as emphasized in the positive youth development work done by USAID and others, to make the children and the youth into curious and innovative thinkers, and certainly some into entrepreneurs. Not everybody will become an entrepreneur, but a good many of them probably can be encouraged to go along that path. And for those who wish to become professors, like Professor Srinivasan or Professor Tripathi, there should always be a pathway forward. And there has been. The Indian system seems to have provided this pathway forward. But there's no compelling reason perhaps to make this a pathway for all. It certainly doesn't look like the right thing to do. I should also point out that I've used specifically the case of India because I am from India. There are ways in which I can talk to my friends and talk to people I know and find out about what's going on and give you a feel for it without getting too caught up in the details and the rigor of it. I can give you a good big picture. I can learn from it. And this gives us one pretty good example of how things are working in rural communities and how perhaps they can be improved. Not to say this is the only way, but this is a way that seems important, that seems to have had a lot of thought put into it, that seems to have worked to a measurable degree. And this can be a blueprint of sorts for different communities in different countries, in different states of India, suitably adapted. Finally, I'm tempted to quote my Jefferson Science Fellow colleague, Professor Joshua Mataipe here. When he saw the title of this talk, Can We Empower the 3 billion youth of the developing world? Joshua's response was, yes, we can. And I think that aptly sums up what I feel towards the future. Yes, we can solve this problem. We have to be smart about it, but we can. Next slide, please. It's a real pleasure to acknowledge some of the incredible people that have been my teachers, that have been my friends, that have taken time out of their incredibly busy lives to simply pamper sometimes my pointless questions, sometimes my undefined questions, and all that. Danielle Pearl, who is the leader of the LLDI team, the locally led development team, where I've been at USAID since last August, is somebody who has taught me pretty much everything I have learned in this game so far. I have done my studies, but Danielle has been behind me. Without her, I would have been lost. Then my colleagues in the group, Elliot Signorelli, Amanda Satterwhite, Colin Grady, Mike Grossman, Zach Push, Dan Grant, Jackie Green, Jen Page, Joyce Friedenberg, Emily Varga, Shannon Meehan, Hannah Funk, Hannah Bottom, Sydney Gumman, who has left, and there are others I'm missing, I'm sure. Mike McCabe, who leads the youth corps part of USAID, has been an incredible teacher. He has been a fantastic friend. He has been available whenever I reached out to him, no matter how busy he has been. Robert Birch, Charles Kayami, Mitch Kirby in education, they have educated me quite a bit. Whatever screw-ups I've made are my own faults, not theirs. Ann Dix, who headed the American Schools and Hospitals Abroad part of USAID, who has now moved on. Francis Harden, Claire Romanek, who taught me about microplastics. I'm very grateful to you guys. Sujit Sinha, Ilangshu Jain, Rehana Sultana Jyotsna of Swanirvar, Father Franklin Menezes of Seva Kendra, Calcutta. Thank you so much. Ted Grover, Bill Cartwright, Father Ben Chinnapan, Ravi Kuchimanchi. You guys taught me stuff I had no idea about. Professor George Philander of Princeton, Alnur Ibrahim of Tufts, Farooq Prima of People's Dialogue on Human Settlements in Ghana, Satish Tripathi, K.R. Srinivasan, and Al Hurd. They have been with me throughout this journey and have been real teachers. And my JSF cohort, these are amazing colleagues, and they have given me enormous support through this learning experience. And of course, Amanda Natara at USAID and Leah Probst and others at the National Academies. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay. We will take some questions. Let me open that up. All right. So the first question is, has USAID considered developing joint programs with 4-H in the US, Head, Heart, Hands, and Health? This organization has heavy involvement in the US rural population with many similar initiatives to those described here, tailored to the US context, and is over 100 years old. They have now branched out to urban and suburban environments as well.
Thank you, Lincoln, for that question. Honestly, the short answer is I do not know. But I can get back to you on this. I'm sure I can find out what's going on regarding this. I was not aware of the work of 4-H, but I also admit that I haven't focused on the US effort on the ground very much. I'm somewhat aware of various efforts in the Southwest, in the Native American communities, but I'm not terribly aware of this one. But I know that Colorado School of Mines has had a role to play in some of these efforts, and I'm going to find out and get back with you. Thank you for that question.
All right. The next question says, great talk, thank you. How widespread are the kinds of programs you are talking about? What fraction of those who would benefit have been reached?
Wow, that's a great question, John. I don't know. I wish there was a journal I could go to where I could pick up all the studies that are being published. Sadly, there isn't. In the kind of stuff that I talked about, I'm sure there are some, but I also suspect that they're probably mostly in the kind of trial stages that I mentioned. There may not be efforts that are quite as nuanced and as well organized as this one. We are talking about a district which is probably the largest or the second largest district in India. This area has a population, this district itself has a population of 20 million plus. There is a lot of diversity. This is an area that has good infrastructure. There is electricity. Most people have some form of a decent home, decent in quotes, with a bathroom. Not everybody, not in the Sundarbans, which is a UNESCO heritage area by the Bay of Bengal, where a lot of people live. That area doesn't have that much infrastructure, but most of the other areas have pretty good infrastructure. So what I'm trying to say is that this area has had a lot of stuff going for it. So many of the things that could be tried here, there was the ecosystem for trying them. not too many regions of the world has that ecosystem. So especially in the developing world. So therefore, that can be a bit of an issue. So, but this is a great question. Thanks. I wish I knew the answer.
Okay, thank you. The next comment says, excellent effort, Surajit. Have you noticed over your lifetime a shift towards greater gender equity in STEM in Indian communities? For example, 20% female participation in physics in US. Congratulations.
Thank you, Al. That is a very interesting question for India. I think the short answer is probably a yes, but I should be really careful. When it comes to women in STEM in India, when I entered college, my class had about 30 some students in it. This is an elite college. Very gifted kids got in, and the number of girls in class, I don't exactly know the numbers, but it was close to 50%. Okay, so the intake point in India is distinctly different than US. That would be my naive observation. In terms of how they progress through the system, I'm sure the attrition is much higher. What happens to them when they reach the professional level, that also structurally would be different. And I would like to think that in STEM, India has moved towards a more equitable scenario. But again, the system, its background is actually very different than in the US, where the choke point happens to be in the schools itself. In India, the choke point may not be that much in the schools, but somewhat later in the progression stage. I hope that answers your question. But if you have any questions, shoot me an email. I'd love to look at this for you and find out more. Thanks.
Thank you. Next question says, you talked about the importance of local context. To what extent does this limit taking learnings from one place context and then applying them in another place context?
That's a fantastic question, Janet. Thank you so much. How should I answer this? I think that what you learn from the local context, with the local context taken into account in one region, in one place, while it is tethered to the place, it is also important to keep in mind that every place has its own issues, right? And the community very much knows its issues. And there is always a great need for innovative young minds to play a role, to get engaged, because that enriches the community. So I would venture to say the answer is yes, that the same approach may be quite useful more broadly. However, the details may not be the same. For example, when you're looking about this region, making community gardens may be something which is really doable. Things grow easily, right? And there are so many things that grow year round. That would not be the case in another part of the world, where the growing season may be different, whatever grows may be different, the skill sets needed may be more complicated. So there may be those differences. But you have roads to repair, you have libraries to run, you have hygiene and health issues to take care of. Some of these are quite universal. So yeah, thank you. I hope I'm able to answer your question.
Okay. The next question is, are children's rights and the UN framework of human rights, along with organizations, for example, World Bank, UNESCO, truly useful to empowering young people?
I'm sure they're very useful. In what I'm familiar with, to be completely honest, my main concern would be that when you take these guidelines, when you take these frameworks and you apply it to a region, these guidelines should be in the background. But the specifics of the region, what can be done, in what time frame, who may be playing a role, what expertise base is available, that matters more, because that actually sets the temperature, if you will, or what might succeed. So I think the order should be local, and then what the guidelines are offering, and kind of bring them together to not only make it local, but to give it a more broad context, if possible. Hopefully that answers your question, Brian.
Thank you. The next question says, thank you for this enlightening talk. Are the youth and children earning money during these active learning trainings? Are they being taught money management skills? Are there child-friendly banking services to help them become good stewards of money too?
Wow, Chris, that's a great question. They are being taught many of these skills, by the way. I didn't get into that because I wasn't there when these programs were run physically. I've actually heard about them for a long time as they were being run and found out about them. Yeah, these kids are pretty savvy. They know how to do things and get things done. Now, so I would say regarding money management skills, somewhat. These are small monies. They don't make a lot of money, but small monies. So it's an informal economy of sorts still. Are there child-friendly banking services to help them become good stewards of money too? That I don't know. I would love to think yes, but probably not. Would be my guess. But I'll find out. I'll find out and let you know. Let me hold this thought in my head. Thank you.
All right, the next person provided a comment or some comments. I'm actually from an Indian village from the same state of West Bengal. I think India, both government and private sector, basically destroyed education system more so for villages. Public education system has deliberately been destroyed to promote private schools, just like public health care there. Empowering rural youth need to have accountability in both education system and also recruitment and jobs. Now India has one of the lowest social mobility in the world. India is 76th in the list of 82 countries, below even Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador, Egypt, Ghana, etc., in terms of social mobility.
Thank you, Jay. This is a very good point. Yeah, there is always an ugly underbelly. Frankly, it's not just India, but I think in much of the world, rural youth have not really been given due attention. The education system has been, as I said, that was based on my observation, probably not something that I would like to say, but the fact is, I am an elite. Education is by the elite and for the elite. That's how sadly it has been. Of course, education has it's difficult. It's like rock climbing, but that doesn't mean that we should forget about the rural kids, right? They need something else. And if they want to do the rock climbing, they can. So yes, I mean, India has a huge problem. This problem has been there for a long time. Unfortunately for India, India is a very large country, as you know. India is going to be the most populated country of the world by 2025, I hear. So whatever problems there are, the numbers are also huge. Yeah, I mean, I acknowledge what you're saying, and there is no question that the challenges are huge. The experiments done were great. They can surely be improved, and I'm sure that a lot of this kind of work would be an enormous help. So thank you for your observations and comments.
Thank you. Next question is, do you think responsible and accountable local governments play the key role in effectively empowering the 3 billion youth population to have a bright future? And if so, any feasible solutions can make this done?
Thank you, Frank. Local governments can certainly play a huge role. Whether they can play the key role remains to be seen. But you see, for government to play a role, there must be a backbone policy in place. Development of a backbone policy necessarily means that you know what problem you want to solve, at least to some degree, right? These problems are complex. So for government to be able to solve them, I think is expecting a bit much when we ourselves don't know what to do, right? So if there is a fair amount of experimentation, which is guided by data, guided by sound thinking and advising, and sound feedback loops, such that the problem can be solved effectively locally in quite a few regions, then one can begin to form some kind of structural policies. And it is my hope and dream that we'll be able to come to that point. But I do not know that there are accountable local governments in place right now that can take care of the youth, unfortunately. I wish that was not the case, but from whatever poking around I've done, that doesn't seem to be the case.
Okay, thank you. So we're past our time. We're at 12:01. If you're available, there are a handful of additional questions. We could take those questions and listen to, oh, okay. So the next question is, for the initiatives that were discussed in your presentation, has there been any positive influence on changing India's government-run education programs in the early grades?
I don't know. India's education program has been revisited, has been certainly worked on in recent years. India's education program, especially for the rural communities, has actually been worked on for a very long time. Perhaps some of the most major efforts of the world has happened in India, going back to the late 60s, mid-60s, late 60s or so. There were a whole bunch of experiments done. Those experiments have had their conclusions. The emphasis was on the early grades, I believe, and also some practical training. The work of Swanirvar has taken it certainly to another level, but there are other groups within India that have tried, that continue to try. And whether that has had an influence in changing government-run education systems, I'm sure it has had an influence. Actually, I have less of a complaint about the early grades, which is up until grade 5, grade 6. Of course, things can be dramatically improved, but that's probably easier to deal with at some level than when the kids become a little older and they don't get challenged enough, or they have to go through a textbook that is so boring that they feel like crying. Most of my textbooks were like that, I'm sorry to say. And this is not an Indian problem. This is also a problem everywhere else in the world. People just write a lot of bad books. What are you going to do about that? I don't know. I mean, but honestly, this is something that I hope is not the biggest problem, but I honestly don't know the answer to that beyond what I just said. But thanks, John, for that question.
Okay. The next comment is a follow-up comment to an earlier submission. It says, India also has the largest number of NGOs in the world, but as per an Indian Express report, more than 91% are corrupt and cater to its promoters than solving the issue they tend to promote. Now, education sector there generate most Black money than any other sector, now beating even real estate.
I'm sure you're right. Hopefully that will change. What can I say? I mean, yeah, but not everybody is like that. But yeah, I've heard this. And there are always bad actors everywhere. Hopefully, with all the changes in financial structuring and so on, things will be better. But these are touchy topics. Okay, I think John. Okay, let's go through the few more questions before we quit.
Yeah. So the next one says, about a month ago, we at USAID met with a UN development officer in Bangladesh who was trying to start an AI education program for college-educated women. So there seems to be a movement to help women to move into these high-tech jobs.
Yeah, John, thanks for the comment. That sounds great. That sounds super. Yeah, I mean, people are trying. There is a movement, and people are trying. There are really talented people around.
Okay. The next question says, excellent presentation, Surajit. Students from India appear to be very well educated. I wonder if you'd like to comment on what India is doing right in this regard that other poor countries can learn and benefit from.
Thanks, Joshua. I think one of the things that India has benefited from is that the elite is doing very well. There's tremendous competition. There's a whole bunch of very high standard universities and research institutes. So the higher education is quite okay. Can it be better? Sure, it can be better. Does it have problems? Sure, it has problems. But in terms of talented students coming through the system, it's extremely impressive. I mean, there's a good reason why you have so many Indian CEOs in major companies around the world, especially in the US. The system produces them. Are they doing the best possible job in bringing out the best in them? I don't know. Can they do better? Yes, but they seem to be doing good. It is the poor rural class that seems to be where much of the problem happens to be. Good universities are very important. Good colleges are very important. Good teachers are very important. It's important for people to go back and go back home. I haven't gone back home myself, but a part of me lives there and tries to do whatever I can from my home base. Thanks.
Okay, the next question says, great talk, Dr. Sen. I'm a school teacher in New Mexico. How to empower youth in developing area in US?
Yeah, thanks, Sunny. I truly believe that it's important to make young students aware of the actual problems they can solve or they can try to solve while they are still young and enthusiastic and have their creative juices to try out things that you and I don't want to try out, probably. That's why I showed the list of young innovators, and that was just a tiny list. I threw out most of the names because I didn't have enough space and time. So there is no dearth of human creativity. Whether how to harness that, it's for really gifted, dedicated people like you to work as needed, to bring them together, find out what they're interested in, what the real problems are, connect the two, and give them an ecosystem by which they can thrive, and tap into experts around the world, which is nowadays quite possible to do, thanks to Zoom, thanks to Google Meet, and everything else. Thanks.
Thank you. So as a follow-on comment to an earlier comment, it says, I work in agriculture and food security, and I studied and now work in promoting agriculture to make it more of a viable profession. And India has a lot of scope in that sector, as more than 55% of Indians rely on farming.
Thank you for that comment. Yeah, that's an absolutely important point. And I just wish there was more agriculture education going on everywhere. I hope Ramesh is in the audience who can say a lot more about this than I can, but thank you for your comment. Oh, Farouk is here.
Yes, he says, great stuff. But how do we delicately balance youth job seeking with education to ensure youths don't abandon education for jobs?
Farouk, that's a super question. And you are the person, you are the world expert on slums. Education is really important, right? But how much education is important? How much education is needed? And how much education is too much education that takes time away from doing things that they can? I don't know what a balance is. I suppose it depends upon the kids themselves, right? So if there is good schooling until 8th, 10th grade, and if one doesn't want to get to college and higher education, the question can be raised as to what it is they are learning in the last couple of years in school that they couldn't have learned earlier, and what it is that they can do in terms of practical work, in terms of bringing out their own talents, in terms of working with an ecosystem by which they can actually get trained to do things that they care about and that are important to them. That question can be raised, and I think it's an important question to actually talk about. I hope there is more conversation, and I'd love to talk with you about this. I'm sure I have a lot to learn. Okay, Jay has many comments here. That's wonderful. I wish I could capture these comments. Is it possible?
I'm not sure if we get a readout of the comments.
Yeah, I mean,
I might try to just copy and paste it into another document and.
Yeah, I'm actually trying to do that right now, but it's very slow. Thank you, Jay. So I can't read them because I'm copying them right now. But Leah, if you want to summarize, he has 2 or 3 comments, I think, that seem quite insightful.
Yeah, so he brings up the NGO issue again. And then, by the way, in the Indian education system is among the worst in terms of school education. It participated just once in PISA assessment, and it was placed on the last position. India's problems are not it's poor, but it's middle class and elites, mostly from the cities. Yeah. And then from one of his recent articles, he provides some text.
Okay. Yeah, I'm trying to capture these. No, I would love to talk with you about it. Well, I'm aware of many of the bad things. I mean, I was not trying to focus on the bad things because it is very easy for us to complain, but very difficult for us to move forward, right? And I think it is also important to, while it is very important, to be honest, I completely agree with you. It is also important to kind of have a positive spirit and see what we can do. Yeah, the education system, look, I am 60 years old, okay? And I studied in India, and I was in India till I was 22 years old, at which point I came here. And, you know, my friends and I had different impressions of how our education system was. And many of them did not react to it the same way as I did. I never liked it for the most part. Not only school, I didn't enjoy much of college either, unfortunately. I wish I did, but I didn't, because I didn't feel it was engaging and interesting and intriguing for the most part. Is it different here? To some degree, but dramatically so, I don't know. So yeah, I mean, the education system around the world is a problem. In India, yes, it is a problem. In terms of rankings, I don't know. I'm sure you're right. But rankings are rankings. Rankings are done by humans with prejudices and biases. On the whole, I'm sure the school system in India is very problematic. I mean, there is really no question about it. There's a lot of private monies, a lot of problems, but hopefully the ecosystem can be changed. I mean, there are problems everywhere, but if the ecosystem can be changed, nothing like it at the end of the day, right? So, but thank you for your comments. I really appreciate that.
Okay, another question has come in, if you have time to answer it.
Okay, sure.
Considering multicultural featured societies, communities, and current socioeconomic conditions in India, realistically is not possible for the future of the youth population without local government leadership and management.
I completely agree. I completely agree. Big things cannot be done by NGOs and by people alone. That's what the government is for. So you're totally right, and one has to reach that stage. But it is also a little bit problematic if we hope that the government can solve a problem, which one hasn't figured out a way to solve, right? The government solve problems like that, or try to anyway, and make a mess of it in almost every place. But yeah, I mean, there really needs to be some thought put into the whole issue of educating rural kids around the world. I mean, we are talking half the world's population here. So we really should be worried about it.
Okay. And then there are more follow-on comments, and then I can.
Yeah, I can quickly read them too, but you can read them for everybody.
Yeah, so the follow-on comments are, I used to think the same positive way, and emphasized and spent many years on various NGOs and also involved with education sector there. To change it, India needs good people to join politics and take up public policy. Currently, Indian elites and even the poor basically discouraged and vote.
You know, Jay, you are totally right. But I would also say that it is also important to educate people, because they are the future politicians. And yes, I mean, that sounds depressingly a long time to wait, but they are also the future politicians of the world. And politicians don't come from the sky. Politicians come from us. And it is this public awareness component of it that is evidently very important. And that's why I'm saying that we really, as a society, need to focus on it and talk more about it than we do at the present time. But really, thank you so much. I realize it's 12:17, so I've far exceeded the time boundaries. But thank you so much to all of you for such fantastic comments. I've captured almost all of them.
Great. So just to close out the session for today, the recording will be posted on our website by this time next week for those of you who may have missed that announcement at the beginning of the event. And thank you, Dr. Sen, for your lecture, and to the other speakers, thank you. And thank you to all the participants for dialing in today. Have a great day.
Thank you, Leah. Thank you, everyone. Danielle, Amechi, Libby. Bye.